Hi, this is Nancy on Norwalk. We're here with Lisa Brinton, mayoral candidate. I'm Nancy, the Nancy, and this is Nancy Schulins, who is an editorial consultant who's been working with me for several months, and she's going to interview Lisa, who's an unaffiliated candidate endorsed by Republicans.
Thank you for sitting down with us today, Lisa. Growth has emerged as a major issue in your campaign. The mayor talks about smart growth. What you're talking about sounds at times like slow growth. The city's expenses are largely personnel. Labor contracts go up a point or two a year. That's really beyond the city's control. So the mayor says we need more density to collect these taxes to pay for these increases. If you slow growth, how do you grow revenue?
Well, the mayor believes, thanks for that question. The mayor and I disagree. I think what's happening is he believes that growth is being driven by apartments, and so increasing density. But every time you increase density, you increase city costs. You've got to, take care of your roads. You may need more, schools. You've got kids, and you have a whole bunch of other of issues to deal with. Actually, the cheapest thing to have in a city, if you want to reduce your expenses, is to have green space because it doesn't generate any costs. But the problem has been we need jobs. That's how you're going to grow. The grand list is growing right now, not in keeping with what our expenses are. As I said, our budget was, I think, 296 million 6 years ago. Now it's 367. So it's grown by about 40 million. It grew by 24%, and the grand list grew by 12%. And what has happened is, and this has been the rub, is that there are going to be appeals. I think there were about 1,800 appeals. There's about 400 lawsuits. We analyzed some of the data we've got here, about $2 billion worth of commercial property. And the commercial property did go up by about 40%. But if you look at the history from our last reval, the grand list went down by about 5%, about 1% a year, because people appeal. So it starts out high and gradually comes down. You mentioned a good point about contracts and stuff. Well, the mayor does have control over contracts, and Board of Ed has control over contracts and our personnel costs. Part of the problem is that in order to sustain a 1% increase in the grand list, which right now would be about 3.6 million or something like that, you need $250 million growth in the grand list in order to keep taxes flat. We're not doing that, and the mayor took $6 million out of the rainy day fund to cover this year's budget, despite all this growth. There have been, with a lot of the growth that's happened, there have been tax credits associated with it, and they will not be paying their full ride for another 7 years. So that's a problem. So the reality is we're not keeping up. And the more people you add, the more you need more police, you need more teachers, you need more firemen. And so I'm disagreeing on that one.
Okay, if you're comparing the grand list to the tax list, to you're comparing the grand list to the budget you're comparing billions to millions when you talk about that growth. Can you
the mayor used that yesterday when we were in our hour meeting. The bottom line is taxes are still going up. Okay, if taxes are going up despite all the growth, then we're not keeping up. And taxes did go up for many people around the city. And we had to use the rainy day fund. We don't have enough jobs. What I do believe we're doing is we've lost as a state. Now this is a state issue, but as a mayor, I would be very helpful to the governor, and I would look to try and figure out how we can grow jobs here in the state of Connecticut rather than just simply being a residential community. But what's happening is the folks that are coming in and moving in, and we heard this in an East Norwalk study, they're making less money than what we have at City Hall. And so that's what's happening is the median salary in Norwalk is $80,000 and going down. At least a third of City Hall, and I'm not suggesting we take away people's pay, but the reality is the people that are moving in are making less money than the people who are servicing the city.
Okay.
And that's the disconnect.
Okay, to move on from there, the mayor has reorganized city government in a way that he maintains will be more efficient and cost effective. You've said that last year's reorganization produced only another layer of management. Some positions generate cost, others protect taxpayers. Which are which? Which would you eliminate? And would you undo the reorganization done by the mayor?
Well, first, in terms of the reorganization, There have been phone calls coming out of City Hall from different departments, the stress that they're under. One of the things that's happened, Norwalk has been caught off guard with a lot of volume. We've got a lot of Fairfield, we've got a lot of Westchester County moving up. We see a lot of New York plates because Westchester's gotten very expensive, and so Connecticut, as expensive as we are, seems cheaper than Westchester. And we also have an immigration issue. So it's kind of created a situation where there's a lot of growth going on. City employees are under a bit of stress in terms of keeping up with a lot of these things. I would talk to the employees first before I would look at the reorganization. Right, in that regard, I'm not going to do anything without talking to everybody on staff. The things that the mayor has done is he took what was a grant writing position and turned it into a public relations position. I would be doing a lot more grant writing and going after money for the city. There's tons of money for police, fire, and the educational system. I come from a background of sales revenue. I generate revenue. I would be looking for other sources. With regard to, what was the other question again? Sorry. That was a long one.
The other question had to do with the fact that some positions,
some positions
cost and others protect taxpayers.
Correct. A couple positions, I would be looking for more inspectors. The bigger issue, there's two issues going on. I'm going to put my board down there. There's two issues with regard to our land use. There's the high end, which are the big apartments, the big box kind of fortress-like apartments. Some of them have got tax credits, others don't. The one that doesn't, the Waypoint, I think that's up for sale because he got a big hefty tax bill. But what we also have are the apartments that are not necessarily on the tax rolls or paying their fair share. That came out today in the paper, where we've got multi-unit housing that's gone from 2 to 3 to 4. And the mayor and I kind of got into a bit of a discussion about it because we can't just kick down doors and fix that. It's a little bit more complicated. I'm at least happy that he's admitting that we have an unregulated apartment problem. But there's an easier way, and it's called the IRS. There are ordinances and statutes that could be put in place at a city level to make sure that every person who has a rental property is supposed to fill out a form. I can't remember what the IRS form is, but it's supposed to be filed with the city. And with the state and the feds, because it's income. And I believe that there are a lot of these apartments that are making a lot of money, charging cash to a lot of disadvantaged people and shortchanging the coffers. And that correlates to our school system and such. So I would be looking for more inspectors just to make sure we capture it. I would beef up the finance department. We lost 2 assessors and we lost our finance director, and I do understand our new director is very, very good. But 90% of our revenue comes from land. And I don't think that we have enough expertise in this city in land and the part that generates our revenue. I would be looking for strengthening that part of City Hall.
And how would you pay for it? Which positions
I have to go in and look
eliminate?
One of the things that I have felt, we were very aware of our finances during the Moshe administration, primarily because we were in the middle of a recession, and so we were cutting back, and there was a lot of awareness. There hasn't been a lot of awareness or numbers used by this administration. It's almost as if there's been police tape around the building, and trying to get information in terms of FOIAs has been very, very challenging. So I have to go in there and look at it. But there are jobs that generate revenue, and there are jobs that generate cost. And so I have to go in there and take a look at it.
Okay. In your first campaign, you advocated adding a professional city manager, a nonpartisan person accountable to the Common Council. I don't believe there's been a mention of that in your current campaign.
No, because time moves on and kind of quality of life and other issues have superseded it. I think the fact that I'm running for mayor is I would approach this mayor's job more as a city manager. I come at this as a manager, as someone who's spent a lot of time looking at balance sheets, and as someone who has spent a lot of time in education. I understand 60% of our budget. I would be less of the mayor who is out perhaps shaking lots of hands and going to cocktail parties, and more of a workhorse mayor. Any chance of having a city manager, that is a charter revision issue. And one of the things that we have a long ways to go is that, and I think this is indicative, and we'll see it whether it happens on Monday night, is you saw how packed City Hall was for the mayor's debate. And someone just told me, I've never seen it that packed in 20 years, and I asked Bill Collins, and he said he'd never seen a hall that packed. But I wonder if we're going to have the same amount of people at the Common Council. And per our charter, we are supposed to have a strong council, weak mayor. But I think what we seen is that we've gravitated away from that. And so any discussion of a city manager or whatever that will be is subject to the council and subject to any a charter revision. It would not be me to decide that.
Okay. You want to be more proactive in attracting small business. How would you do that?
Well, I would pick up the phone when they call. Two things I would have done differently than this administration, and I pointed that out. We had a restaurant that had been in South Norwalk, the Brew House. They wanted to move into the ballet studio over there in Wall Street, an area that's suffering. So this is a well-established restaurant. It's not a new restaurant. You know, what is it? They say 9 out of 10 restaurants fail. This one was a successful restaurant. They needed help with some commercial kitchen installation, and we didn't help them out. And they moved up to Black Rock, and they're very successful up there running another restaurant. We do that by the same token that we're willing to give a $6 million development fee to a builder. Okay, we're looking at,
We'll get to that.
So I kind of thought that was short-sighted. Another thing that happened is there was a potato chip manufacturer, friend of ours, Lauren Rosado, who used to be with the NEF. She and her partner have started a potato chip business, a boutique-y, I don't want to say cutesy, I don't want to insult it, but a high-end potato chip company, and they were manufacturing. They had a commercial kitchen in New Jersey, and they've placed themselves in, I don't know, like 500 different, kind of deli type of stores for the chips, and they called redevelopment 3 times, and 3 times they were blown off. And how good would it have been to have some little light manufacturing, potato chip factory, they needed a commercial kitchen for this here in Norwalk, and nobody got back to them.
So you're saying lack of response.
Lack of response and lack of seeking that out. I think the only business that we seem to be in is apartment businesses, and then looking to put retail on the first floor.
Okay.
And I would be looking beyond that.
Okay. You've spoken frequently about illegal apartments as a cause of Norwalk's budget problems, and many have connected illegal apartments to the rise in school population. What evidence, if any, do you have that any of Norwalk's new ELL students are living in apartments that violate city codes?
Well, we heard it in the BOE in February by Frank Costanzo. He spoke to the influx of students that we've been gradually having over the last few years, because there has been a spike that I believe Nancy reported on. It kind of started in 2013. And he articulated the fact that many of these folks do not have leases. They will bring in a phone bill or whatever, but they are paying cash and they have no leases. I recently spoke to a woman in South Norwalk. I met with her, and she's lived here in Norwalk since 1996. She has no lease. She pays cash. And that's been going on since 1996. So we also have indication of this. Many police and fire and real estate agents, as they go in, the trend has been from where we've had, a lot of our immigrants, we had young men coming to make money and send it home and go back home. The trend in the last few years has been entire families coming up, and they're in homes that may have 4 bedrooms, and then there's locks on the bedroom doors. And we've heard this from I've heard this from the police. These are all anecdotal stories that this is what's going on. So, and we heard it. You can go back and look at a Board of Ed report. I think it was in February, but they did not have leases.
Also, on the same subject, many cities with substantial immigrant populations have reassured them that it's safe for them to report crimes to the police, because absent a judge's warrant, they would not cooperate with ICE. Would you do as Mayor Rilling has done and appear with Norwalk's police chief to reassure the immigrant population?
Yeah, the immigrant population, I'm not worried about that. And that's been a little bit of a smear campaign to go after me. I've been after the landlords. That's who I'm after. When we spoke about, I've been talking about illegal apartments ever since I got involved in land use, which was about 6 years ago. I was involved in education, teaching at a state level, advocating for more money for Norwalk. I was involved in the district data management team. So, and again, there have been attacks that I'm trying to take credit for all of the educational achievement. No, I'm just saying that I was boots on the ground doing that as opposed to mayor at the time. But where were we going around the place? Sorry.
We were talking about.
Sorry, folks.
We were talking about your willingness to appear with the police chief.
Yeah. So with that, but in terms of but no, there was another part to that. It was the. Yeah, I'm not worried about that. The issue's been, it's going back to the apartments. There's been an attempt to try and paint me as anti-immigrant or racist. Lots of pretty ugly things happening in this election, which means I must be getting close. But no, this has always been, I've been involved in the apartment issues ever since I shifted over to some of our land use about 6 years ago. So this was well before we started having any immigrants coming in. And I always said that we had never linked our, and it was about revenue, is that we have apartments that are not on the books, not paying their fair share, since we've always been struggling to fund our school system before we had an immigrant issue. So, so that's the issue, is about landlords and making sure we're capturing that revenue. And what the issue has now become, really, ever since we saw with the building that burned down on Wall Street, Ms. Dileep's building that burned down in 2010, that was not up to zoning code and building code. There were some violations, and 2 people had to jump out of the 2nd-story building, and the city was sued. Okay, and so what happens is, if we've got unsafe buildings that are not up to code by landlords, unfortunately, the city is responsible for these things, and we saw that in 2010. And I've still not been able to get a number on how much jumping out of a building is worth. I reckon $1 million per person, but 2 people had to jump out, and that was settled in executive session.
Okay. Another education question, or a first education question. Your opponent has tried without success to broker a meeting in hopes of repairing the relationship between the Board of Ed chairman and the leaders of Norwalk's Black community. If elected, what steps would you take to address that issue?
I would absolutely get them back together again. I know both of them. I know Mr. Barbas. I know Ms. Brinton Williams. Norwalk, we all come out. We seem to all be in City Hall. There's a whole gang of us that seem to hang out at City Hall. We have no other lives. But I do think that this, I would certainly make that come back together again. We're all Norwalkers at the end of the day. And so I look at this, I would bring them together, yes.
Okay.
And I've seen them, and Brenda and I know Mike have reconciled at various times, and there's been kisses on the cheeks. And I know that they have come together. They come together, they go apart. They come together, they go apart. So I definitely. I've got a lot of. I'm not gonna. Never mind what I'm going to say. That's right.
Okay. You have said that if you're elected, you would request from the state a 90-day moratorium on the Walk Bridge project. What are the chances of them granting that? And if they did, what can you do in 90 days?
Well, I don't think that we did our due diligence. Yes, I would request a 90-day moratorium. In fact, I threw myself on the mercy of the governor when I bumped into the mayor and him at the Oyster Festival. And it's still kind of moving along, but it's moving along pretty slowly. I know that there have been appeals by former Mayor Collins. I know Harbor Master's been in there. Yep. There has been a lot of conversation. There is a lot of back conversation going on with the state. And the state is also kind of broke at the moment. And so if we could put a moratorium on the bridge and look at some other options and avenues in terms of its impact on Norwalk, and are there other engineering solutions? And let me add, I spent 20 years at AT&T and a good portion of my career in Bell Laboratories. And the one thing I know about engineers, if you tell them that you need an industrial strength bridge, which is what we kind of described, we needed something akin to Baltimore Harbor, then that's exactly what they're going to give you. I did a drive around the Upper Harbor with the Hour a few weeks ago. And really, other than Divine Brothers, there's nothing else up north of the river. Everything is either a condominium or an apartment complex. And so I don't see a massive industrial complex north of the bridge. And I see other things, and so that's why I think the bridge is a little overkill.
The harbor master was not successful in his effort to delay or, to rethink the scope. The understanding that I have is that the plans are done, the building is going to start, and there's just no stopping this.
Well, then the one thing, like I said, never say never until they start dismantling it. So that's the way I see about this thing. My other disappointment with this mayor and this council was that when this was being discussed several years ago, they allowed a FONSI, they allowed a legal standing of FONSI, finding of no significant impact. One of my complaints from day one with this was 5 years of construction, in the center of town, potentially cutting off East Norwalk. And we allow a legal standing of finding of no significant impact. And all Norwalk is getting for this is some air conditioning and a fence around Lockwood Matthews Mansion. And shout out to Mike Mushak and David Westmoreland for getting that. But quite frankly, for an infrastructure project of that size, and I know the bridge is 650, 700 million, and there's 300 million of other stuff, but most large projects go over budget by 10 or 20%. So it's going to be $1 billion when it's said and done. We should have gotten infrastructure for our schools. We should have gotten much more compensation than what we got for this. And so, if this goes ahead, we've been shortchanged twice. One, I think we're wasting taxpayer money and disrupting the city. But moreover, we were not fairly compensated for taking one for the team in terms of the Northeast Corridor. And I would have fought much harder. And the fact that there's been just remote silence and there's nothing we can do is completely unacceptable from my perspective as a resident and taxpayer.
What about 75 years from now? Because they're saying this bridge is going to last 100 years, and that's why they're saying they need a bridge that will open.
Well, part of the 75 years from now, one of the big issues with that bridge and the fact that it needs to remain navigable is dredging. That's what's driving this, is that we have to put in this $1 billion bridge so the feds pay to dredge it. I believe that, quite frankly, with the federal government, is that dredging is going to be is based upon the volume and the revenue generated from that area. We're not. I don't believe the feds are necessarily going to pay to dredge that again. Anyway, there's not enough commercial industry there. I think what we probably would need to do is set up a authority, a fundraising authority, so that we can, that we can figure out we pay to dredge this every 10 years or however you need to dredge it. There are other solutions. I believe what we should be doing is probably developing the water. All great cities in the world have rivers running in the middle of them, that we could be creating a real hospitable environment there. We do have condos. We need to kind of create the pathways and try to create a nice river walk front along there. And that's what we should be trying to do to move that forward. And I think, I don't know what Mr. Devine thinks, but at some stage perhaps they might want to sell out, or maybe we keep it. That some of that one piece of industry is quite atmospheric, quite honestly, to keep a bit of an urban feel. But I don't think that you put in something that big and that ugly that will change our skyline forever. That Victorian Walk Bridge is iconic. It is iconic. I don't know if you also know that we've got, we're the #1 oyster producer in the state of Connecticut. This thing is going to be very, very disruptive. And I just think that it was done very rushed. We didn't get compensated enough. And all I'm asking for is, what's 90 days? It's been such a hush-hush. There's been nothing done by this administration. And I think, I'll shut up. This is where we got it, but what's the harm in looking?
Okay. Your son, in a letter to the editor of Nancy on Norwalk, said, "It will be tough to dislodge an incumbent Democrat by a hereto unknown candidate in Democrat-leaning Norwalk. What do you think your chances really are?" Well,
hey, it's tough, but it's not impossible. I think the turnout at the debate on Monday night was indicative. It all depends, and I've been tarred and feathered. All I'm doing is trying to present a different view. I believe I have a problem with the fact that the mayor doesn't think there's a problem. That's the problem. And I believe that a lot of the growth that he's bringing with these very, very large fortress-like apartments are changing the makeup of Norwalk. It's brought traffic, it's brought congestion. Like I said, he's talking about the grand list in terms of real estate. He's not talking in terms of jobs or anything else. And he's only talking retail. And let's face it, retail pays minimum wage. So minimum wages are not paying the rent in Norwalk. And so, just because I think it's going to be a close race, but just because it might not be possible doesn't mean you don't try. We've lost our two-party system in this city. I am not a Republican, I am not a Democrat, but we have lost all dialogue in this city, all right? And there's been, because this is obviously predominantly a Democrat state, Democrat city, we have adopted issues that have been going on down in Washington, D.C., which I vehemently disagree with. I'm very exhausted by the toxic culture down there. I don't know, I can't do anything down in Washington. I can't do anything about my state, but my state is broke. Okay, it's financially broke. I do understand my city. I understand land use and I understand the school system. And so this is where you don't pursue something just because you might not be successful. I do believe I'm waking people up to the real issues in this city, and that alone is a reason to do it. But you may be very surprised. We'll all be surprised. Who knows? Because they wouldn't be attacking me if I wasn't getting close.
It's been pointed out that some of the issues that you've raised, property taxes, immigration, low-income tax credits, and school funding, are state and federal issues. Have you considered, or would you consider running for a state or federal office?
No. I'm an operations gal. I come out of operations in my life, and I've been hanging out in the classroom. I'm a nuts and bolts kind of gal. One of the things I'd like to point out about, again, also in terms of how I see the state issues, if you look at the other larger cities, they've got more representatives dedicated to their city. We have been gerrymandered, and it's not to take anything away from Lucy or Terry or Gail. They do an excellent job. But Norwalk has not had enough representation fighting for us. And that's why I think that a mayor needs to be much more vocal about some of these state and municipal issues. The needs, we saw it with the school system. I think regionalization would have been great. I mean, probably the best school system in the country is down in Montgomery County, where one of our superintendents, Susan Marks, came from. Looks very similar to Fairfield County, but you don't have these pockets of poverty. You get economies of scale. People panic that they'd lose their local school system, their local school. You wouldn't. What you would start to do is get some economies of scale on certain things that we don't have in Connecticut. But what I think you saw was things that might be beneficial for Norwalk were not beneficial to Wilton residents. And so when you're a state rep and Gail's got to try and straddle that fence, that's very, very difficult. And so I think having a mayor much more vocal about state issues that impact cities is what we need.
Okay. So it's your first day as mayor. Congratulations. Jason Milligan greets you with a smoothie, demanding to know why you haven't responded to his 14 emails and 27 voice messages. Up until now, he's been somebody else's problem. Now he's yours. What do you do?
I sit him down, and we sit down very publicly, and we talk about things. I don't like what's happened on Wall Street. If you talk to people, hindsight's 2020. POCO was a mess. POCO was financially was going to be a tough nut back in '04 when they conceived it. When we were in the middle of the recession, that's why it was silent. Through the Moshe administration, they couldn't get funding. It finally came to fruition on Harry's watch. But I think we sit down with all the players in a much more candid fashion. I think women are naturally more collaborative. Sometimes I think there's a little bit too much ego going on. There's been too many things said by all parties, and I think we just need to tone it down. I look at it almost like my children when I go down into the basement and they're fighting. I was like, I don't care. You're all grounded. You're all guilty, and we start over. So.
You've said that as mayor you would shut down the project as proposed by the developer and make Citibank pay up for it. Is that what you would do?
Well, it's up to me to convince the council. Obviously, it's going to be my persuasive skills on the council to say that I don't think that the taxpayers of Norwalk should be bailing out a bad loan that Citibank did. Okay, the first developer defaulted. Why is it Norwalk taxpayers' responsibility to bail Citibank out? I would be much tougher with Citibank. I'm not afraid of them. The other night I heard a hint of, well, they're the largest company in the world. And I said, do I hear you're afraid of Citibank? If Citibank's going to hold the city of Norwalk hostage in the center of our city because of a bad loan they did, bringing in another developer and letting them make $6 million and giving 15 years of tax credits. 15 years. And the projection is that there's going to be between 25 and 50 kids in that building. It won't even cover the students. It'll cover like 9 kids. And that's in today's dollars, not necessarily tomorrow's dollars. So yeah, I would persuade, I'd say, listen, time out. We need a lot of time out in Norwalk. Time out. And we say, no, we're tearing this LDA up. They've already modified it before. You've defaulted on it. And then the Citibank would probably be forced to put it up for auction. It'd go out into the open market. And it would go back into private hands. I think we've overextended. Redevelopment can do good things in areas, and sometimes government can be a hindrance. And I think 20 years down there, we have nothing to show for it. And I will go back even to the mall. I don't know if you're going to talk about the mall, but we took that area by eminent domain, okay, redevelopment. 20 years later, what's in there? A mall, a private company.
Didn't you support the mall?
I wanted more conversation. I've been iffy. I want to support them all now. It's here.
Yeah.
But I am I am weary of them all. I'll probably go once a year. I'm not a big shopper. I think two things that need to happen. We immediately, they've been talking about this at the State House, we immediately need to be able to start collecting sales tax on that revenue. People don't realize, most voters, residents don't realize, the only thing that funds this city are property taxes. Sales tax revenue goes to Hartford, all right? So all these big box stores that our leafy neighbors don't want, the Costco's, the BJ's, if that comes, Best Buy, the mall, that's all regional revenue, and the sales tax goes to Hartford. We get the wear and tear, we get the traffic, we need the extra policing, and we don't get anything.
I believe your opponent has raised the possibility of a 1 cent increase on sales taxes that would go to Norwalk to cover these.
The sales tax has been discussed in the House, and Bob brought this up. It was in the last session, allowing municipalities to raise revenue other than through regressive property taxes. The problem I had is that they were going to make so towns would be able to raise their own revenue, but if you were considered a regional hub, you had to share it with the other municipalities, or with the other the leafy towns, which I thought was very unfair. I don't think we should have to be sharing it. We're bearing the whole cost of that. So this is not Harry's idea. It's not my idea. I would be calling for it needs to happen immediately. It was it was discussed in the last state legislative session.
You also were talking about POCO and the 15 years of tax breaks. That's built into the LDA.
Well, they're modifying the LDA, as you see. They modify it when they want to modify it.
Big modification. I don't know how that, well, all right, you also mentioned that it could go to auction and a private person could take it over.
Well, a developer, like that's what Citibank would sell it for whatever, 10 cents on the dollar, whatever they do, and they'll try to get whatever money they can back out of that, and then we'd have to look at that.
Well, Mike DeScala told me that Jason has poisoned the waters so much that no one else would bid on it. So wouldn't an auction basically be?
I think this is the developers all. I'm going to go back to male ego, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
What would you like to talk about that we haven't asked you about?
Geez, well, I comment on Nancy. I mean, one of the things with my long relationship with Nancy on the board and submitting op-eds and stuff is I comment all the time on Nancy on Norwalk. I feed the discussion. I try to keep people informed. There isn't really anything. I mean, I'm just a girl running against a guy. I'm a citizen. I'm a resident. I was not a politician. I've been a reformer and an activist. I guess a bit about my history in terms of how I came to run for office. I spent 20 years at AT&T.
What did you do there?
I started out on the long distance side, but I spent the bulk of my career on the network systems and Bell Laboratories side, and I basically put in phone networks around the world. I spent 7 years in London, working with British Telecom, Telefonica in Spain, Telecom Italia. So I put in network switching and transmission equipment.
What was the largest number of people that you've managed in those jobs?
In those jobs I've had, it was small sales teams. I had engineers, probably about 20, 25 people. I mean, I was responsible for sales. Our business unit was $1 billion operation systems business. That's what I did. And I also did strategy and stuff. And let me just keep finishing. You asked me what I want to talk about. Yes. Let me finish. Okay. So, and then I spent 5 years over in Singapore. Okay. And I sold network equipment over there. I then came out of, I retired from AT&T, and I worked for 5 years as a management consultant. So I worked with Fortune 500 executives. I coached executives in Temasek Holdings over in Singapore. So we helped prep them for their presentations. I did behavior management, styles of behavior, getting too much of one style in an organization and what that drives. And then I went through some illnesses. I went through breast cancer and leukemia and a bone marrow transplant. My children were young. I was an older mom. And so I retired from the corporate world and focused on raising my children. I don't say that for any sympathy, because I get a few critics trying to say she's sympathetic. This was years ago. They're coming after me for everything. But I got involved in education, PTA mom, fundraising. Then I started a writing program. I was on the district data management team for the school system for 7 years, where it was more of an operations job, but I spent kind of not as much time as the Board of Ed, but certainly times with the principals and those that run the schools, and we tried to figure out how we could close the achievement gap. And then from there, fundraising, activism with CONCAN at a state level, And then, like I said, I kind of fell into land use. And that's where I saw 60%. We never have had enough money in our school system. And, you know, what are we doing with our land and how does that generate revenue? And that's how I came to be where I was. And then charter revision, when we had an opportunity to bring a little bit more integration with how we do things in the city, and we simply went to extend the term for mayor, which according to the charter, you know, is a weak mayor, strong council. And so we needed to do a few other things. And I went out with the do it right or not at all.
Okay. So we have a sense of what you feel that your strengths are.
Correct.
What are your weaknesses?
I talk too much.
What are your weaknesses as they would manifest in the mayor's job? What would you need to get up to speed on?
Well, the first thing I would do when I go in there is I sit there and open up the books. I know how to read a balance sheet, so I want to sit there and see where our finances are. And I would be looking at the grand list in different areas to see what parts of town make what kind of money. Where's our money coming from in terms of office rental? What is a big box? What is residential? And to really break down our revenues.
Is that information not available to?
Not very easily at the moment, no. Well, you forget we've lost our assessors, and we lost it. In the meanwhile, we lost our finance director, and quite frankly, I've not wanted to put our new finance director in the middle of this kind of campaign battle. So I've tried to be very respectful to the employees. This is between the mayor and myself, and I don't want anyone in the crossfire.
Okay.
And perhaps that's my mothering instinct, but I haven't wanted to throw any shade on anybody in the city.
Okay. So you talk too much, and you don't have the specifics
Correct.
Of the money, where it's coming from, how much it is. Anything else you can think of that you feel you would need a little time to get up to speed on?
If I am elected, I will pull in the former mayors. I will pull in Mayor Knopp. I will pull in Bill Collins. I would even ask Harry. Part of the reason for this challenge, the difference, women are not afraid to ask for directions. I think that's the big difference between us and the guys sometimes. And no offense, gentlemen, but I'm not afraid to admit that I don't know everything. And my biggest problem with this mayor is that he said everything's fine, and it's not fine. Am I looking at the numbers and trying to see some big number trends, just some general trends, that it's not. Our state is in trouble, all right? To think that Norwalk is the shiny beacon on the hill, and this is a fabulous city that I have no intention of leaving. I will have to downsize because of my tax bill, but I have no intention of leaving. But to suggest that we don't have any issues or that they won't be coming down on our city as we have to sort through some serious issues is foolhardy. And so I would be drawing on former mayors. I would be drawing on a whole host of people of all political parties. I have just as many friends I voted for on the Democratic side as I have on the Republican side. And so that's the difference, is I think I would be more inclusive than this mayor.
Okay. There have been periods of incivility in this campaign, as there have been on a national scale. What would you do to bring people together who are bitter opponents now?
Come on, guys. This is about Norwalk. We're all Norwalkers. I have been viciously attacked. Nobody has seen. It's pretty unprecedented what Senator Duff did to me, to cherry pick my comments for highlighting some concerns that we have. We're in the best, as a city, we're in the best position to educate these immigrant children. But the question is who pays for it. And so to attack me like that was uncalled for. What I got from the head of the DTC, the mayor has never disavowed it. This is all dirty politics. My mother had to read that. My children had to read that. But you know what? Hey, that's you know, you're in politics now, Lisa. I've said I consider myself to be more of a city manager type, but hey, it's not as bad as some of the other things I've been through in my life. It's not going to kill me. So,
actually, the mayor did say in our interview with him that he was not consulted on Bob Duff's.
He said the same thing to me. There is nobody in this city, and there was nobody in that town hall that believes that. They're unprecedented for that Bob Duff is going to suddenly come out and attack me based about a comment that I've made on Nancy on Norwalk. And I've made lots of other comments like that. This was a calculated, incredibly calculated, and the mayor is foolish to think that anybody believes him.
Would you have a problem working with Bob Duff?
No, because it's about Norwalk. It's not about me. It's not, and that's why I've said this election is not about me. My campaign's called Lisa for Norwalk, versus Harry's is called Rilling for Mayor. And I think that pretty much sums up who we are. I've been honored by the number of Norwalkers who've lived here far longer than I have. I have picked up support from people who have 3 or 4 generations of Norwalk who are saying, you know, thank you for stepping up for our city and the change that we see that's happening too quickly. I've only been here 22 years. But I know how special this place is. I've lived all over the world, all right? And I am terrified that we are going to end up with a $15,000 tax bill on a $400,000 house, and we're going to get swallowed up into what I call Fairchester. And so, and I think a lot of people are. And the mayor doesn't think it's a problem. And that's what this election, for the first time in a long, long time, is, do you see the mayor's version of Norwalk, and this is all great and on to glory? Or do you see Lisa's view of, we have to be cautious to make sure that we retain our maritime and our historic character and not just get swallowed up into a county?
Okay. If you lose, will you continue to seek the office in the future? Will you become an activist in another area? What will you do?
I'll take a vacation. I've been at this for 15 years, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I said I wasn't going to run the last time. It's funny, I said that, I go, I'm not running again, and then I did. I have a lot to give. I will be turning 60 right after the election, and you look at your life, and you got, you know, I got fewer years ahead of me than behind me. I'm in a position to give back. That's what I've been doing. My children are grown. I have a lot more to give in the public sector. I went back to school for it, and I intend to do that. I need to take a break. One of the concerns, and I do want to address this to Harry and all of Harry's supporters, I have a memo. When we got into the charter revision, and I tried desperately to say, if you open up a charter once every 10 years, you really need to, let's clean some things up, right? And right after the election, when the no vote went out, Harry called me and he said, Lisa, will you take up the mantle for charter revision? And I was in the middle of my master's, right? So I was like, yes. And I might add, everybody in my master's program knows everything about Norwalk because it was my case study for everything. And I said, absolutely, Harry, let me at it. You know, I can't wait to do this. And then nothing happened. Nothing happened. And then we met in February. And here's the memo. Okay, because I have a record of it, and I talked to him and I said, Mayor, you know, I want to talk to you about the role of the mayor and the percent of time, why I kind of thought a city manager might be valuable. I talked about the mayor has to be an advocate towards the state. We have to be a custodian presiding over the department meetings, a figurehead for ceremonial things, a manager, a partisan sometimes, obviously in politics, and a visionary. I talked about the Norwalk issues. I talked about our budget, our revenues, education, the walk bridge. This is back in February of 2017. I talked about our governance issues. What was our budget process? How did we have to drive in our charter more of a relationship for how we could deal with a changing housing stock and what the assessor's office could do? The Common Council, it's hard to get people to serve. We have a lot of seats where they're running uncontested. It's getting harder and harder for anyone to go into politics because of what they say to you. Boards and commissions, did we need all the boards and commissions? A lot of the complaints I've heard from the developers is that to get anything done, as you go around, it's like pinball. You go bouncing back and forth between commissions, oftentimes with similar people sitting on similar commissions. It takes us forever to get anything done. That's why 20 years after eminent domain at Maritime Motors, we ended up with a mall. We missed out on so many market cycles because of our slowness. And then I wanted to review the independent authorities, the Housing Authority, Oak Hills, the Parking Authority. A lot of these agencies operate, the redevelopment agencies, they operate with separate boards and they're not directly accountable to the people of Norwalk. And so these were the reasons I said that the charter needed some updating. I offered all this, and he ignored me. And then he said, well, the council, John Igneri wouldn't do it. He blamed John. And then he said to me once, well, perhaps I should have pushed harder. And I said to him again the other night before the debate, I said, Mayor, it never needed to come down to this. I wanted to just serve this city. And he pushed back again and blamed somebody else. And I said, just about all of your issues that you've wanted passed have passed unanimously. I have to believe that you just didn't want it to happen that, bad enough. And so, all your other policies have gone through. You just didn't want it. And he's kept me out. So I would try to serve. The mayor will not let me serve anything. If he wins again, it will be more apartments and pedal to the metal. And that's the difference between the mayor and I. I would outreach and I'd say, please, Mayor, you're a great police chief. Let's work together. But the mayor has shut me out. And when you have when it's hard to get people to serve, and I think I'm reasonably intelligent. I'm not partisan. I think that's been a short-sightedness on his part.
Well, thank you for sitting down with us and letting our readers know more about your positions. We wish you good luck.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Nancy. Thank you, Nancy.